We didn't get a single Apple display update in 2025, which is honestly surprising given how overdue the Studio Display is for a refresh. But the good news is that 2026 is shaping up to be the year Apple finally gets back into the monitor game. Rumors keep pointing to early 2026, and personally, I'm hoping that means we'll see the new Studio Display launch alongside the M5 Pro and M5 Max MacBook Pros. It just makes way more sense to debut a new Apple monitor with the higher-end MacBook Pros rather than something like the M5 MacBook Air or the A18 MacBook, even though those are also expected early in the year. And yes, I know the Mac Studio with the M5 Max and M5 Ultra isn't expected to ship until mid-2026, and will probably launch around WWDC, but fingers crossed, Apple doesn't make us wait that long for a new Studio Display. Gurman has repeatedly mentioned early 2026, and that lines up perfectly with a March or April window, though there's always that small chance of a Jan surprise since Apple has dropped higher-end MacBook Pros than before. Just don't bet on it. Now, I suspect a key detail from the M5 announcements might be hinting at a highly requested upgrade for that next display, a 120Hz refresh rate. When Apple revealed its trio of new M5 products, the iPad Pro, MacBook Pro, and Vision Pro, one small but important detail stood out. The new M5 iPad Pro now supports driving external displays at up to 120Hz. That's a first for iPad, and Apple specifically mentioned that this feature is ideal for creative workflows like video editing and gaming. Even more intriguing, the company added that the iPad Pro can now support adaptive sync, meaning it can now dynamically adjust its refresh rate for smoother motion and lower latency when connected to an external panel. Now, this might sound like a technical footnote, but this actually is a pretty big deal. Support for 120Hz external panels isn't something Apple just turns on for fun. It takes hardware level compatibility and firmware integration across iPadOS and display controllers to make it work properly. And given the timing, just as Apple's rumored to be finalizing its next Studio Display, it's hard to not see this as a deliberate move. After all, one of the biggest complaints about the current Studio Display is that it maxes out at 60Hz. For a $1599 monitor, that's a sore point, for creative professionals expect the same ProMotion smoothness they get on iPads, iPhones, and MacBook Pros. So adding 120Hz support to the iPad right now feels like Apple's laying the groundwork for something bigger, perhaps that long-awaited Studio Display 2 with a higher refresh rate panel. Macs have already supported 120Hz external displays for a while, but Apple never offered its own monitor capable of taking advantage of it, so seeing the M5 iPad Pro gain that ability at the exact time a new Studio Display is rumoured to be in development feels way too much like a coincidence. If anything, this could be Apple's subtle teaser, quiet preview of what's coming next. So yeah, based on all this, I'm pretty optimistic that the next Studio Display will finally get that long-requested 120Hz upgrades. And that's just the beginning. According to Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, Apple's not preparing one but two brand new external monitors, and they could arrive as soon as later this year or slip into early 2026. I think early 2026 is more likely. Gurman says the company is already nearing mass production with these displays, and the new models are internally codenamed J427 and J527. That's significant because it's the first time Apple's revisited the monitor category in 3 years, and it strongly suggests we're looking at more than just a simple refresh. Gurman hasn't confirmed whether these codenames directly map to a Studio Display successor or perhaps a next-gen Pro display, but he did previously report that Apple was ramping up work on a new Studio Display earlier this year, so I'm going to focus on that. In fact, the two codenames could even represent two different size options, which I'll delve into later in the video. To understand where we're headed, we've got to take a look at where we started. The original Studio Display was unveiled alongside the first Mac Studio in March 2022, part of Apple's big return to professional desktop hardware. It was a sleek, minimalist slab of aluminium and glass, packing a 27-inch 5K Retina LCD panel with 600 nits of brightness, a fixed 60Hz refresh rate, and an A13 chip inside running the camera and spatial audio system, as well as a clean set of ports, one Thunderbolt 3 and 3 Type-C. And yes, it looked fantastic on your desk, but the moment you realized that the default $1,600 model couldn't even raise or lower its height unless you paid an extra $400 for a lift and height adjustable stand, things got awkward. Also, the display itself was essentially the same LCD display older Macs were using for years, so it wasn't anything special. But finally, change might be coming, guys. The biggest update coming to Studio Display 2, and the most reliable rumour so far, is the switch to Mini LED. This comes from Ross Young, a well-respected display analyst, who posted in early 2024 that Apple's working on a new 27-inch Studio Display with Mini LED technology. Young has been right about Apple display leaks in the past, including correctly predicting the sizes of the iPhone 16 Pro models more than a year ahead of launch. So when he says Studio Display 2 is coming with Mini LED, we pay attention. I know some might be wondering though, why not give us OLED? Well, Apple's only starting to roll out OLED to iPads, and it's rumored to come next year to the MacBook Pros, so producing 27-inch OLED panels at scale will take some time. For now, Mini LED is the realistic step up. Ross Young didn't confirm the refresh rate, but that's where the M5 iPad Pro clues come in, because if that device already supports 120Hz external displays, it's not hard to think that the Studio Display will follow suit. And honestly, that makes perfect sense. Apple's gradually phasing out 60Hz across the range, the iPhone 17 finally gets 120Hz, and there are even murmurs the next iPad Air could support 90Hz, so 120Hz on the Studio Display feels like the natural next step. Speaking of next steps, make sure you hit subscribe and tap the hype button below. It really helps a small channel like mine reach more Apple fans, and you'll never miss my latest breakdowns on Apple's upcoming products. Now, it's not just industry murmurs we have of the Studio Display 2, there's literal code references to a new Studio Display. Codenamed J427, it reveals that it's running on the A19 Pro chipset. That's the same chip inside the iPhone 17 Pro, which is kind of odd when you think about it. It's not like this thing needs more power considering the A13 in the current model only handles center stage and the spatial audio system, but since the A13 is out of circulation, I figured they'd just throw the A17 Pro or A18 in it and call it a day. But no, Apple's going full flagship. Why? Probably for marketing flex, and maybe for some computational imaging or AI-driven camera upgrades, since Apple's trying to stuff AI into everything nowadays. Yes, some might say, what if the square sensor is coming to the Studio Display? And that is a possibility, I guess, but I also don't see the need for this on a desktop, since the biggest advantage with the square sensor is to take landscape selfies in portrait. And well, who's taking selfies with their monitor in the first place? Now back to Gurman, he said Apple's preparing 2 new monitors. He didn't specify which models these are, but it's likely that one is the new Studio Display and the other is the Pro Display. But let's speculate for a minute, because there is one big wishlist item many have wanted, and that is a bigger Studio Display. While the 27-inch model is nice, it's starting to feel small. Loads of users have asked for a 32-inch panel, something that bridges the gap between the $1,600 Studio Display and the $5,000 Pro Display. If Apple introduced a 32-inch option with a 6K resolution under $2,000, it would hit a sweet spot for creators and prosumers alike. Of course, no Studio Display talk is complete without mentioning that stand. In 2022, Apple's decision to charge $400 extra for height adjustment was absurd, and nearly every $300 monitor includes that as standard. So if there's one area Apple needs to fix, it's that. Either include the adjustable stand in the base price, or rethink it entirely. Just give us better options. At least give us better third-party options directly on the Apple Store, that would be nice. At this point though, the picture of the Studio Display is starting to take shape, guys. Mini LEDs almost a lock, 120Hz feels increasingly likely, a 32-inch version is possible, though that's just speculation, and if Apple can nail the ergonomics, update the webcam, and improve the speakers, this might finally be the Studio Display we've all been waiting for. Either way, it feels like Apple's about to do the Studio Display properly this time, not just a fancy aluminium shell with a recycled panel, but a truly premium monitor experience worthy of the Mac ecosystem. If it delivers true HDR, better motion handling, improved adjustability, and that smooth 120Hz experience, it could easily become the go-to display for Mac users everywhere. Let me know what you think in the comments. Would you buy a 120Hz Studio Display if it launched next year? Or are you still waiting for a bigger size or maybe a better stand? And of course, don't forget to subscribe and tap the hype button so you don't miss my next deep dive on Apple's upcoming hardware. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.